Hello, and thank you for joining the Shortlist and Ardent Partners webinar. My name is Tyler Dlugolecki, Enterprise Marketing Manager here at Shortlist, responsible for the emails you may see from time to time. Thank you in advance for not marking spam. Makes my job just a little bit easier. I want to welcome you to today's Direct Sourcing and Compliance Management webinar. I'm going to quickly introduce the agenda today before I pass it off to today's panelists. We'll start off with the talent acquisition revolution happening in the market, featuring brand new contingent workforce research from Ardent Partners. We'll then dive into the direct sourcing section of the talk, which we feel will be a huge game changer in 2020 for businesses that choose to invest the time and resources. We'll then transition into compliance's impact on direct sourcing, followed by a case study from a best-in-class business and how they are maintaining strong levels of contractor and labor compliance. We'll then wrap up with some Q&A. You can submit a question at any time. However, we will wait until the end to answer these to make sure we stay on schedule. To submit a question, please use the appropriate Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. But before we get started, I want to do some quick introductions. Joining us today is Chris Dwyer, host of the Contingent Workforce Weekly podcast. Chris is a recognized expert in contingent workforce management. As a seasoned industry analyst, Chris actively advises global executives on technology and innovation, as well as workforce and talent management strategies. Chris's work has been featured in major publications such as USA Today, CNBC, and Forbes. Today, he serves as the VP of Research at Ardent Partners, the Boston-based advisory and research firm. And Michael Matherly. Michael has over 20 years in procurement services related to strategic sourcing and vendor and talent management. Over the last decade, Michael has delivered IC compliance and procurement outsourcing services to mid to large size organizations, including co-founding IC PreCheck, a service that certifies self-employed professionals as compliant with criteria for IC status, which reduces compliance risk for companies. And with that mouthful, I want to welcome you, Chris. Welcome, Michael. Great. Michael, looks like, or I'm sorry, Chris, would you like to get us started here?
Would help if I unmuted my microphone. Thanks, Tyler. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. I know that we've got attendees from all across the globe today. As Tyler said, we're very, very excited about today's event, have a wonderful presentation for all of you that I hope will unlock some of the sort of confusion and questions around this concept of direct sourcing. Obviously, talk about the evolution of talent and the state of today's non-employee and contingent workforce. And so I wanted to kick things off here with a quote from some recent research, and I'll read it verbatim. The ultimate success of the modern business depends on the way its people, systems, and operations align to meet the dynamic needs of the global marketplace. And so I think this is a fantastic quote in the bubble that is today's sort of world of talent, because we are not just talking about a piece of our workforce. We're not talking about a talent that's augmentating what we're doing on a daily basis. We're talking about a piece of our overall business that really has an incredible link to how well we succeed and how well we thrive in terms of achieving our ultimate business goals and objectives. And so there's a lot of talk today around a concept known as the future of work, and we've got a little bit of definition of this on the very next slide. And so I know you hear a lot about the future of work, and you may be wondering, Chris, direct sourcing, compliance, what does it have to do with the future of work? Well, talent to us is an incredibly vital piece of this future of work movement. And essentially, the future of work boils down to three major areas. And I think, sort of an asterisk to put next to it is that a lot of people think the future of work is just an idea. It's a concept. And to me and to Ardent, it's a lot more than that. It's really a movement. It's the movement to optimize how work is done from various perspectives. And so a lot of conversation around the future of works, unfortunately, gets sort of bogged down in the world of tech and innovation. And of course, you see that's the middle piece here. Tech and innovation is an incredibly critical component of getting work done. There's the idea that there's so many new forms of technology. There's so many new ways to automate both tactical and strategic pieces of our businesses in order to better get work done. And so too often when you see discussions of the future of work, it's often in conjunction with discussions about artificial intelligence, blockchain, machine learning, robotics, and sort of the futuristic things that we think of today. And in fact, I just wrote an article earlier this week on the hit TV show called Westworld, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a pretty popular show that's produced by HBO. And in Westworld, there's essentially a lot of context around self-aware AI and really the future of robotics. And I think that, again, there's an analogy here. I think that too often that organizations, when they think about the future of work, they're thinking about robots doing things. They're thinking about self-aware AI essentially replacing human jobs. And really the future of work couldn't be further from that. So tech and innovation, big piece of the future of work puzzle. But I also think that it's really critical to talk about aspects like business strategy, essentially being more transformative in how we think about how we structure our businesses, being more flexible and agile, and being more open to aspects that may not necessarily have anything to do with technology, like diversity and inclusion and sort of blending different types of talent in the best aligned way to get work done. But the piece of the future of work puzzle that we're going to talk about today is, of course, talent. And we all know that there's a talent acquisition revolution happening, and so many major trends that are driving so much more attention on how talent is acquired today. And so I don't want to go line by line here and focus on every single one of these aspects. But really, you see so many interesting trends shaping how businesses are addressing how they find talent, how they engage talent, and how they manage it. I mean, everything from this idea of the agile workforce, which to me, this is another one of those sort of buzzwordy phrases out there. To me, the agile workforce is just the natural evolution of today's contingent workforce. I don't think that the agile workforce is anything that's necessarily revolutionary. All it is meaning using your non-employee workforce in a more deliberate and recurring manner. The rise of digital staffing. I love the digital staffing topic. I really do think that one of the reasons why we're here today is because of the fact that businesses want a more direct relationship between itself and the talent that's out there. And it doesn't mean that we're going to wake up, a month from now and all the staffing suppliers are going to disappear, or your human-led recruitment team is just not going to have a job to do. All this means is that businesses want to be more agile. They want to be able to get work done in a more on-demand and efficient manner. And the best way to do that is have on-demand access to talent. And that's what digital staffing is doing today. Talent-led programs instead of cost-led, budget-led programs of the past. And so one of the fantastic things that I've been able to really research over the past 14 years is this incredible shift in how companies view their non-employee workforce. And so I can literally remember my early days as an analyst and talking to many procurement executive and about their contingent workforce programs and them saying, Chris, that the end all be all of our program is how much money we're saving the company, or what the level of cost savings that we're driving to the bottom line. There's so much more to the contingent workforce than what we saw, 10, 15 years ago. And so one of the interesting aspects that, of course, is the number one reason why we're all here today is this laser-like focus on direct sourcing. And of course, that's something that we are going to dive into today because, again, that's a huge piece of this future of work puzzle. So 10 years ago, I like talking about the past as a way to sort of compare us and, give a little bit more perspective on where we are today. So in 2010, approximately 20% of the average company's total workforce was considered contingent or non-employee. And back then, that was big. I mean, you had many, many organizations that going into last decade, maybe that number was maybe 7 or 8%, and they couldn't even imagine a day where a fifth or a quarter of their workforce was non-employee in some sense. But that was a direct result of the last great economic downturn that this country saw. And the reason being is I often refer to as an idea called the perfect storm. And because I'm from Boston, that does not mean it's about the movie based in, in New England called the Perfect Storm, but really rather a sort of an awakening, an enlightenment between the world of business and the world of talent. Because when the economic recession hit, you had a lot of organizations that, some of you probably even were directly affected by this years and years ago. Lots of layoffs, lots of cutbacks, lots of scaling back on a lot of the aspects of business. And so one of the major sort of, I'd say, sort of the pieces that fell out of the economic downturn that really benefited us today was that more and more very talented individuals sort of understood that in order for them to make a living, they'd have to become a freelancer. They'd have to become a contractor. They'd have to offer their unique expertise and skill sets in a way that wasn't in a full-time traditional engagement. And sort of the byproduct of all that is that not only did businesses sort of understand the overall skill set impact of non-employee labor, but the other side of I saw the two sides of the coin, the business side and the worker side. There was sort of benefit on both sides. More and more individuals, very talented individuals, understood the way that their lifestyle, their work style shifted, and on the other side, businesses understood, okay, these just aren't people that are going to slide into our organization, do something for 2 or 3 weeks, be sort of a faceless worker, and then leave. Yeah, every business today has temporary workers that are literally just filling in. They're literally augmentating our workforce. But a bigger piece of that non-employee workforce is actually driving value. It's actually impacting how we as businesses achieve our greater goals and objectives. So that perfect storm was to me, sort of the spark that set this journey on its course today. And so today that number is 43%. And I see a question out there, whether that's US or global. So these statistics are global in nature. And I understand that, some of you may think, Chris, that's crazy, or Chris, hey, that's sort of right where we see it. So there are some industries that the entirety of their workforce, 60, 70% of it could be non-employee. And then there are others that, maybe a lot less than that. But the global average, and when you include gig workers, independent contractors, freelancers, staff log, contingent workforce, even professional services, which we consider part of the contingent definition, that number is 43%. So moving on here. So talking about the evolution of talent and how big a piece of it, how big a piece of the future of work it really is, let's look at sort of how businesses have sort of been enabled with all these really fun, exciting new sources of talent. And so we have a pretty nifty graphic up here right now that speaks to all of the new sources of talent, the new ways that businesses have to find the talent they need. And one thing that I do want to say, and I know I talk a lot about the past, and maybe it's just me being naturally a nostalgic type of person, but I can remember back maybe about 5-6 years ago, asking a question, Arden Research, of maybe about 400 or 500 global contingent workforce programs. And we asked those organizations, where do you see your program going in the next 12 to 18 months? Do you see it being more commodity-led, meaning more focused on cost savings, more focused on spend management, supplier management, or do you see it being more talent-led? And so that was the first year. We're talking, now, 7, 8, 9 years into my career as an analyst covering this space back then, where it was the first time we saw the majority of contingent workforce programs out there be more talent-led in how they think about their workforce rather than being more commodity-led. And I thought back then that this was going to be huge, and this was going to be a finding that sort of set the tone, for the next, 5, 10, 15 years of how businesses Yep, engage talent and acquire talent. And so anyway, what we see here really is just a pure evolution of talent. And businesses today, they have the ability to tap into, pre-vetted networks of talent. They can search, they can select, they can literally log on to a digital staffing platform, understand what the requirements are, view 30, 40, 50 people or services, select the ones that they want to interview or have a next step dialogue with, and boom, excuse me, pure direct relationship between the business and its talent in an on-demand way. Obviously, like I said, traditional staffing suppliers, traditional staffing agencies aren't going to go away. I mean, I think that's one thing that we need to discuss here. And I think it's, it is one of those things that, I feel like I'm in a privileged position to be able to talk about this and talk to so many people on a daily basis about it. And so obviously being responsible, there's so much discussion today on not just the non-employee workforce, but digital staffing providers and, in-house programs that run on technology rather than using an MSP. And I always want to say that you're not going to wake up 2 months from now and have MSPs be gone or have, traditional staffing agencies just disappear. These are still going to be very big pieces of how we find and engage talent. At the end of the day, they're still very important. The best way to look at this slide is to think the business today, if they're truly being talent-led, they're truly focused on skill sets or expertise, they don't have to go the traditional route. They have the option, they have the ability to do that, but there's so many other sources here. Human clouds, social media. Again, everything is sort of agile. It's on demand. It's flexible. Allows you as a business, you as a hiring manager, you as a procurement exec or HR talent acquisition exec, to find the talent that you need in an on-demand way. Using freelancer management system technology, curating your own talent pools. I mean, this is sort of the way that talent is evolving. Of course, you see direct sourcing there. That's a big piece of it as well that, of course, we're going to talk about at length today. So moving on here, some interesting benchmarks here. And these are the very, I don't want to call them standard because they're not necessarily standard, but they're not necessarily revolutionary types of benchmarks. I mean, these are things that a lot of contingent workforce programs today track in some way, but 38% of the average company's non-employee workforce is actively and accounted for in corporate planning, budgeting, or forecasting. And so, Chris, what does that mean? It means that on average, 62% of all non-employee labor is not necessarily unseen, but unaccounted for. And this is the closest thing that we're going to get to a true visibility metric. If you are not accounting for your non-employee workforce or your gig workers or your SOW-based projects or what have you, independent contractors and freelancers, that means you don't have visibility. And of course, one of the many things that Michael's going to talk about today is why that figure is so disheartening and why so many businesses today could really use a boost when it comes to compliance. And actually, I'll preview that measure here. You may see 73% and think, Chris, that's awesome, right? Total compliance rate. This is an amalgamation of various compliance metrics, whether it's compliance with regulatory policies, independent contractor compliance regulations, state, federal government compliance. Yeah, on the surface, it seems great, but the fact of the matter is, it only takes a handful of non-compliant instances in your program for there to be very dire ramifications. And so even though this number is slowly going up each year, there's still a lot of work to be done. And so I want to talk about the other figure there in blue. 57% of accounted for, that means 57% of visible non-employee talent would be rehired for future projects or initiatives. And so what this is telling us is that we're still not at that phase where all of these sort of next-gen talent acquisition strategies are actively resulting in the impact that we want, the skill sets, or the expertise that we really want. It means that we're still not fully harnessing the power of all these new solutions and these new strategies and approaches. And so that's not something to me that I'm upset over or very depressed over. It just means that when you enable companies with all these new tools and strategies, it's going to take some time for them to really figure out the best way to make it work for them. And so this isn't necessarily one of those statistics, again, that, I'm just so heartbroken over, but it does mean that, businesses still aren't, they're not batting 100 when it comes to batting 1,000. I'm sorry, when it comes to finding the right talent. There still are some gaps in using all of these great new tools. In year-over-year cost savings, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but my procurement friends in the audience today, I'm sure there are a bunch of you. This is an interesting stat because, and I don't have the figure offhand, but it's a pretty sizable increase from 2017 and 2018 and 2019, which tells me, of course, that procurement, I think, is doing a much better job of getting involved with sort of the evolution of their programs and, obviously helping out where they can best put their own expertise as, wonderfully talented individuals that really know supplier management and really know how to optimize a supplier base. And of course, a bulk of those cost savings are happening on the traditional staff aug side. So good stuff there. So we asked a question in the research study about why businesses are leveraging non-employee talent. And there are a wide range of options here, from, hey, it's cheaper, shorter engagement, some of the more traditional items that you would think about when it comes to, why businesses would leverage non-employee talent. But I thought it was really interesting that the top reasons here, the top 4 reasons, really all revolve around the idea that we need better skill sets. We need to enhance our workforce. We have a need for talent, and we need to get work done. And we're going to stop at nothing to do that. And so this is a very far cry from, 5-6 years ago, even a decade ago, when the number 1 and number 2 answers were always, it's shorter and it's cheaper. And this, again, this is one of those eye-opening statistics that really tells us that today's non-employee workforce, it's not just augmentative in nature anymore. And that's a phrase that I've said a bunch today, and I'll probably say it a few more times before the end of today's webinar. But really, at the end of the day, it's about talent, it's about skill sets, it's about expertise, and doing everything we can to best align those forms of talent with the projects that we have going on, the initiatives that we need help with, and really just in a greater way, understanding the best way to achieve our core business goals and objectives. And so really interesting set of stats there that when companies are reviewing non-employee talent today, there's this major shift to a skills-led, expertise-led world, which of course we are all very, very excited about. And so moving on to the next slide, this is another, I could say this about every slide, right? This is interesting. There are findings that really, really make me say, wow. And this is one of them. And so, again, the top areas of focus, they don't necessarily dynamically change year over year until the past couple of years. And so when we launched our annual contingent workforce study, back in 2016, 2017, the top areas of focus pretty much remained static. It was always drive more visibility, improve the quality and depth of our data, and better harness technology and innovation. And again, not saying because you don't see those on the screen that they're not important. Tech and innovation, very important to the future of work movement, even more important for today's contingent workforce programs. Visibility, data analytics and reporting are still top 4 area of focus. But look at the top 2 here. And the number 3 there got a special place in my heart, and I'm sure a special place in Michael's heart as well when we talk about SOW. It's so interesting to see talent pool curation development and direct sourcing as the top areas of focus today. And again, it really, really proves, this state of contingent workforce report we're going to unleash this upon the world in just a couple of weeks. It's an amazing set of statistics because it tells us that business is really revolutionizing the way that they find talent. They're thinking with skill sets in mind. They're thinking with the actual talent and expertise in mind. It's not a game anymore of what's cheap, what's fast, how do we get it done, in 2 or 3 days. It's literally just about how do we best address how work is done, and how do we do it in the best manner possible, not necessarily the quickest. And so I think this sets the stage pretty beautifully for talking about direct sourcing. And actually, before, Tyler, if you don't mind just flipping back up to that, I'm so sorry. We're going to be talking about direct sourcing and talent pools and all of that in a second. But SOW management and services procurement, this is something that has been near and dear to my heart for such a long time. And the fact that this is always a top 2 or top 3 area of focus and priority year over year, it was like this last year, it was like that the year before, tells me that businesses still are trying to understand how to manage a huge piece of their non-employee workforce, of their contingent workforce program, that is the more complex contingent labor like SOW and services procurement. And so I just wanted to make that note that we're talking so much about sort of forward-looking ideas, and we're talking about how amazing direct sourcing and these new talent acquisition approaches are. But I don't want to forget some of the core focus here that that SOW management is always going to be critically important. And and this is, again, maybe it's unbiased because I'm so involved with all avenues of contingent workforce management today, but I'd be remiss if we didn't mention just how important that is for all contingent workforce programs going forward. So now moving on. Sorry, Tyler. Thanks again. I think it's a great segue here to the second half of our presentation. Really excited to have Michael walk you through his amazing thoughts and insights here. But the idea behind direct sourcing, very, very simply put, is that you can harness the overall power of your company's brand to attract various types of candidates: silver medalists, alumni, freelancers, gig workers, contractors, so on and so forth. This is all part of an overall talent pool strategy. Now, direct sourcing, for those of you that may be on the fence or don't fully understand what the benefits are, to me, there are 2 main benefits. One, lower hard recruitment costs based on the sheer volume of hiring that you're expediting via on-demand talent portals, of course. The fact is you don't have to go through the same rigor that you do when you're just starting a requisition from scratch. And the second one, significant increases in time to fill rates, overall talent productivity, and of course, faster onboarding. And one of the things that I've been talking about in relation to direct sourcing is that it is going to be a game changer, because at the end of the day, businesses really crave that direct relationship with talent. And if skill sets and expertise are such a huge focus, and we are truly living in a talent-led world rather than a commodity-led world, well, direct sourcing is going to continue to be a huge way, very important way for businesses to get talent into their organization. And so one of the things that I want to tee up here before Michael takes over is self-rankings here. And so I think it's important to note that when we're talking about something like direct sourcing, we're talking about talent pool curation, we're talking about these new and exciting strategies, that there are sort of there has to be some level of risk that we're all looking at, that we're evaluating. And so one of the more sort of disheartening figures that we're finding here at Ardent is that there are very few organizations that really have strong controls to help monitor risk and help manage compliance. And you see here that these are self-rankings, and we asked organizations to rank how well their compliance and risk mitigation controls were for the entirety of their non-employee workforce. And you see there that the majority, 63% together, are either average or weak. And I think it's very critical that if we're going to talk about a forward-looking revolutionary strategy like direct sourcing, it's imperative that we understand the compliance implications of such a strategy. And so with that, I want to turn things over to Michael. Michael, you may be on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Excellent, thank you. Well, before I get started on the compliance side of things, let me thank Chris for giving a shout out to SOW. As we were preparing for this webinar, Chris and I were reminiscing about the days where we worked on SOW services procurement, 7, 8 years ago. And it still plays, ranks third on the list. And now it's behind direct sourcing, but I think that's okay. I think direct sourcing is probably a more appropriate focus for technology and innovation. And as some of you who follow me know, I really believe that direct sourcing is going to give a rise to all ships, particularly SOW and services procurement. But today we're here to talk about compliance and its impact on direct sourcing. Ardent study further found that about half the companies are actively and consistently, only about half the companies are actively and consistently reviewing the classification of contingent workers that they engage. And over half the companies say that they struggle with compliance and risk issues relative to the overall talent acquisition efforts. I don't think any of us would be surprised by those numbers, but we should all be concerned given the changing nature of the work. It's only increasing its velocity, and if compliance, as it typically is, a lagger to innovation, then I think we all need to be aware of it and make a real effort to keep it from creating too big of a gap that might adversely impact the benefits of direct sourcing. Okay. Chris did a good job of highlighting the impact that technologies are having, how they are driving the appetite for direct sourcing solutions, but not all things direct sourcing are moving at such velocity. As we saw on the prior slide, regulatory compliance, and specifically as it relates to 1099 independent contractor classification, are clearly lagging behind. Some might even say that the regulatory environment is moving in the opposite direction. That's a tough reality when we've got a shiny new object in our industry that really seems to be taking off. But the fact is, those pesky state and federal worker classification rules still apply. AB 5 in California is real. The threat of Senate Bill 863 in New Jersey is real. And while only a few states are taking these aggressive actions to further constrain the market on 1099 workers, Massachusetts and Illinois are two others to be on the lookout for. The more important observation we might make in today's regulatory environment is that no states and no federal agencies appear to be making any significant moves towards relieving or easing the rules for engaging 1099 workers. So it's not all about what you see, it's about what you don't see. So we're effectively stuck with using a slower, more traditional compliance screening methods in a higher velocity talent acquisition model. And those two things, as I don't think I'm surprising anybody, those two things appear to be at cross purposes. The two steps forward that direct sourcing solutions are providing to our industry seem to be countered by the one step backward when 1099 classification screening has to be addressed. Obviously, the compliance conversation is focused on how to conduct compliance screening within the various direct sourcing platforms that Chris went over and mentioned. Inherently, though, it's important to recognize if we are screening workers for proper classification, we have to acknowledge that all contractors or contractor engagements might not meet that 1099 criteria. So a topic for another day is how W-2 contractor payrolling aligns with direct sourcing and the platforms that are starting to support it. There are obvious structural and regulatory differences about how W-2 contractor engagements are onboarded and within the context of direct sourcing tech platforms. Today, we're going to focus on actually conducting the screening and then go beyond the screening into some of the agent of record services that the platform can afford. Again, another day's topic is supporting payrolling and W-2 contractors in these types of platforms. Okay. Recognizing these challenges, we have developed what we think is a unique approach, and we call it a formula, which is clearly a gross simplification, but I think it is accurate. This compliance formula doesn't alleviate compliance requirements, if only, right? But we have redesigned the application of the traditional compliance screening model to better align with the direct sourcing model itself, the objectives and the benefits that Chris mentioned earlier, and to work within the host, and let me mention that again, to work within the host talent platforms, the pools, the freelance management systems, the gig and on-demand platforms. Our focus is on pre-vetting and use and reuse, pre-vetting of the contractors and pre-vetting of the services those contractors deliver. And we do this from within the platform as contractors are invited to create their profiles. We do this with platform clients prior to them uploading their requests. And we leverage the platform, whether it be a freelance management system, a talent pool, a gig, on demand, whatever it may be. We leverage that platform to do it all in one place. The reason we do that is it keeps the users on both sides of the equation, both the contractors and the engagement side managers, if you will, in a single system versus sending them out to a different system to respond to questionnaires and to upload audit file documentation. Our approach is to do it all within the host platform. And Shortlist has been a great partner collaborating with us on this, and we've figured out a way to do it, and we'll give you a glimpse of how we're doing it at Shortlist in just a minute. What does pre-vetting do for us? It's a critical part of our formula, of our approach. It allows us to apply this simple formula that goes like this: a pre-vetted contractor plus a 1099 ready engagement equals a compliant 1099 engagement, all screened and managed right there in the host platform. If you take that and apply it to the way, before we had direct sourcing, before we had these different tech platforms, and you look at kind of the traditional way of doing IC compliance screening, that's effectively what we're doing. There's two pieces to the screening that have to be addressed. The contractor, are they an independently established business, the C factor in the ABC test, and then the engagement side. Is it properly contracted? Is the direction and control, embedded in the contract? And in fact, are the behaviors during the engagement all aligned with that A factor of direction and control, and making sure it's not too heavy-handed on the client side, and really that the contractor is driving most of that direction and control. To build upon the pre-vetting concept, though, we use the platform environment to facilitate some key compliance aspects that further support our provision of the service of agent of record services to manage those 1099 contractor engagements for the platform clients. For instance, our IC agreement incorporates the work orders that are created within the platform between contractors and client requests. So, no separate SOW to be developed offline or separately and then separately negotiated. Instead, we leverage the work order details in kind of the matching or the selection process that these innovative technologies have developed and are really the engine, if you will, behind that technology or that marketplace. We leverage that to go along with the IC agreement master terms in order to form, each individual SOW, which is clearly a requirement for each 1099 engagement. This nearly fully automated SOW creation methodology, enables the on-demand and the gig platform so that, for instance, an IC pre-check contractor that is matched online with a 1099 ready engagement at 5 p.m. today can actually be fully and compliantly engaged and ready to work a shift or a gig that starts at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's the kind of alignment from a compliance perspective that we're talking about that really doesn't constrain, but actually enhances and reinforces kind of that velocity, that new acquisition model that we refer to in direct sourcing and what the technologies are really driving towards. So we're super excited about some early successes we have, and we do have a case example to share with you in just a minute. infusing the compliance into the existing processes built into these direct platform technologies clearly yields a faster onboarding and screening cycle time. It creates a better user experience for both contractors and managers, and it allows the compliance team to monitor, this is important, to monitor activity to identify those yellow and red flags that may lead to intervention of a higher risk engagement due to like a material change in contractor status. For instance, if a contractor, creates their compliance profile and says they're in the state of California, but then halfway during an engagement they live in Oklahoma, but then halfway during the engagement they move to California or New Jersey, that's something we want to know from a compliance standpoint. Using the platform to kind of have visibility to the full engagement and the contractor profile, and obviously a lot of things that we do to sort of set the stage to enable that is really important for us to manage our risk because we're taking on a fair amount of that risk by being the agent of record, but also help the client and the platform itself manage that risk for everybody involved. Okay. So what I just talked through was, I wanted to give you a screenshot of what we have done at Shortlist. We believe that approach, that kind of pre-vetting, reuse, platform-based solution can really be built into, virtually any of the direct sourcing, talent pool, on-demand gig types of platforms. But we've been very fortunate to partner with Shortlist, and this is how we've built it into their platform. As you can see in the top screenshot there, the candidate onboarding, compliance vetting is a very integral part. We work with the clients to determine, what are they doing to vet them from a skills or an availability or other perspective, and then we kind of tack on the compliance vetting. And it comes across very much like the rest of the profile that contractor is filling out on that platform, and that's the key. They barely know that they're even going into a compliance vetting because we leverage a lot of the data they've already put into basic information, and then we ask them maybe a dozen specific compliance related questions, and then we review it, and then we communicate with them. We have them upload the documentation that we require right into the Shortlist platform. So everything we need from a compliance team, from a screening perspective, is right there at our fingertips. And if we need to go look at the engagements they've had, or we need to review their resume, or we need to review their address, or anything else about that contractor, we have access to their full profile. So it really makes it convenient and easy and quick for us to do that kind of compliance screening. And then the other piece I wanted to point out was on the bottom screenshot. We refer to it as badging. A lot of platforms get set up as 1099 only, right? So really, you have to meet the 1099 criteria both on the contractor side and the engagement side in order for this marketplace to sort of match and create the services to be delivered. Not all platforms are obviously like that. I mean, there's some that can go both ways. It could be a 1099 or it could be a W-2 contractor engagement. In either case, this badging that we do after we complete the pre-vetting of the contractor really gives the platform owner, but also their clients, an option, lots of options to sort of say, hey, sometimes I have staff augmentation needs, sometimes I have project-based needs, and this is a very much of a project-based need, so I want to make sure that I'm aligning with a 1099 contractor. They go out and they can search for it, or they look for the badge, or they just simply see that, hey, 5 of my 5 contractors align with this request that I have. That badging allows the selection manager to sort of review and say, oh, I see these 2 actually are pre-vetted for 1099 contractor status, and the other 3 aren't. So I think I'll just narrow my focus and my selection to these 2 that are already badged. It really lends itself to reuse, because when we compliance vet, when we screen a contractor in the platform, it's not a one and done like traditional screening tends to be sometimes. We actually maintain those records and we renew them. So if a contractor stays in the platform for more than a year, regardless of what their engagement activity, we're going to go back to them, and just like you would do in the traditional offline kind of compliance environment, we're going to reevaluate them. We're going to see what's changed. We're going to make sure that they're still certified. We're going to make sure that they're, haven't taken a W-2 job with any of the clients. We're going to be looking at any other flags that may arise over time. That reuse and badging really pretty much go hand in hand together. All right, let's go take a quick look at the case example we put out. And again, Tyler can send this out to you, so I'm not going to read this, verbatim, because I want to make sure that we leave ourselves some time for Q&A. This case study is an actual client that we worked through Shortlist to set up. They're a global consumer goods company. They want to use some contractors online to do consultations with their customers, and they wanted to leverage only independent contractors across the U.S. To complete these consultations. So the challenges they were facing were, hey, traditional screening really wasn't going to align itself. And when I say traditional screening, what I'm really referring to is the typical, 5, 7, 10-day or more long screening process that sometimes occurs when you're not, in a high velocity platform like Shortlist or some of the other technologies. But the traditional screening wouldn't really support their model. And they needed to have the protection of an agent of record. They needed to obviously properly screen and classify each contractor that came into their environment, partly because, and they needed to have that strong sense of reuse because of the short tenures of the gigs or the engagements that these contractors were going to be working on for the client. And they needed to make sure that, workers' comp and general liability insurance requirements, which was a client flow down requirement, were put in place. So we put in place, as you can imagine, that platform-based solution that I reviewed earlier. And it yielded some really cool results. And it's what really gave us some excitement about, hey, this is a viable solution, and we've built upon it since then. But the initial screening cycle time from when a contractor came in, and because the way we structured the compliance vetting stage of onboarding and leveraged the other information that our client was also gathering, the ability for Shortlist to request and handle the upload of documentation we're seeking, we had an average screening cycle time of the contractor of 1.5 days, and 30% of those were actually less than 1 day. So super excited about those results. And then the automation of compliance. Ooh, if you could stay on that slide. Sorry. The automation of that has allowed us to be the agent of record within the platform. So everything we need to do to, be compliant ourselves by providing the service, but also to protect and indemnify the clients of the platform are in place. And finally, we didn't talk much about it in today, but it also enables us to do what we're referring to as an opt-in insurance through Bunker. And there are other providers of IC-specific insurance, but Bunker is who we pioneered with, so I wanted to give them a call out. Greater than 90% of the contractor population didn't have their own insurance, or the insurance they had did not meet the client's flow down requirements. So we leveraged the platform questionnaire to actually engage or offer, we're not brokers, so we're not selling it, but we simply offered to make the connection to a compliant insurance package, and over 90% of them opted in for it. We basically configured that into the Shortlist payment calculation. So we extract, the 1.5%, I think it is, for their insurance cost. It's usage-based, meaning they don't have to go out and buy a full-year premium, and then we handle the premium payment back to Bunker. It's so easy for the contractors to say yes and to opt in. They don't have to fill out an application. They don't have to answer any other questions of, hey, do you have your own insurance? And if the answer is no, would you like some insurance that we could facilitate for you? So that's kind of the results that we're super excited about on the Shortlist platform with regards to compliance and direct sourcing. I really appreciate you guys' patience. I know I kind of blew through this. but I wanted to do that so we could leave ourselves, this 10 minutes of Q&A time. So I'll just kind of turn it back to our moderator, Tyler, to maybe facilitate some Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, just to end on time here, we have about 10 minutes here for some Q&A. I have a bunch of questions that have come in, so we'll just choose a couple here. Here's one for Chris. Why is there so much focus today on direct sourcing? Because it doesn't necessarily seem like it's a new concept or strategy.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, and I get asked this all the time now, and especially in the wake of some of the newer research findings, right? That shows that direct sourcing is a top two focal area in 2020. Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I mean, direct sourcing has been a viable strategy for talent acquisition for years, and in fact, a lot of European contingent workforce programs, I'm sure, have been leveraging direct sourcing for such a long time. And in fact, a lot of MSPs that have huge business overseas in Europe and other parts of the globe, they have clients that have been leveraging direct sourcing for a really long time. Why is it just hitting here? Why is it so hot now? Because I do think that in many areas, North America has sort of been more progressive, and they've been a little bit faster in terms of adopting some of the newer technologies and adopting some of the new strategies and approaches. But when it comes to direct sourcing, I think that there's sort of an elegance to traditional talent acquisition that's applied to direct sourcing. And when we're moving to a more talent-led world of non-employee labor and contingent workforce, well, I think direct sourcing just makes sense. And so I do think that that's one big reason why so many organizations today are starting to realize, well, this is a this is a huge piece of how we can really revolutionize the way that we find and engage talent. And so, and it's all positive. None of it's negative. There's nothing that tells me that the focus on direct sourcing today is a bad thing. To me, it only speaks volumes to the fact that more and more businesses are really rethinking and reimagining how they find the talent that they need.
Great. And this one came in for Michael. Thinking of different types of industries, are you seeing certain clients who are more risk adverse and in need of more compliance measures? And are third-party risk departments pushing procurement to review services, staff augmentation processes? Or are you seeing compliance more driven by other aspects of the business?
No, it's a good question, and something we think about, talk about, and quite honestly struggle with all the time, Mary. I would say the third-party risk departments should be pushing procurement and should be pushing HR and talent acquisition to review their processes to make sure that compliance is addressed appropriately for their business. As far as the different types of industries, yes, we always have industry-specific questions, and we all kind of know that there's different kind of industries that align themselves well or are more risk or less risk. But what we've actually been seeing more is more of a geographic push and inquiry about compliance. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've done, and I know there's a couple of you on the phone. I see you also out in the compliance business, so we're really glad you joined us. But I know you're having these consultations with existing clients as well as prospects or just people interested on how to navigate AB5 and how to navigate, do business in New Jersey. Is it safe to do business there anymore? And, those conversations are really, I wouldn't say industry specific, although there's some carve outs that might suggest otherwise. I think more of the conversation is about how do they address the regulatory environment that is, exploding right before their eyes. And for those who have large populations or portions of their populations in California or New Jersey or elsewhere, what I'm happy to hear is that they're becoming aware of it. And a lot of it is happening from, companies like Shortlist, my company, a lot of the companies that are joining us on the phone today who are reaching out and saying, hey, this direct sourcing trend is great, and it's really giving you access, greater velocity to talent. That's absolutely the right thing to do. But they're also adding in, and hey, let's not forget about the compliance piece of it. Let's not, take that one step backwards because we forgot to adequately address compliance. So I'd say it's across industries. The other thing I'll say before I finish up and go to the next question is, the types of businesses we're seeing that are engaging with the direct sourcing, the freelance management systems, the online on-demand gig platforms tend to be very technology-based, right? I mean, it's their business to do matching of marketing or graphics professionals and clients who need those services. So we're seeing a lot of those new startup, technology-based, talent-based marketplaces emerging and recognizing that they do need a compliance component to their solution, or they're not going to be able to fully satisfy some of their clients. We found that not all clients are requiring or pushing down the compliance requirements to their tech providers, which isn't a surprise. But we are starting to see some people to recognize as they're scaling, hey, I'm getting bigger. Now I've got more than 100 contractors and I'm in 20 US states as opposed to just this one during my pilot. They're starting to recognize, okay, compliance needs to be brought into the picture. We obviously recommend that it be included from the very beginning during pilot stage because there is an economic as well as a procedural impact and you don't want to be adding it later. It might just disrupt what the good that you've created. So I'll pause right there and just see if there are any other questions.
Yeah, this one came in for Michael as well. So when it comes to independent contract workers, ICs, W-2s, et cetera, what are the major categories of compliance that businesses need to be aware of and prepare to act upon or control for?
Well, yeah, no, it's a good question, and I tried to address it a little bit, Andrew. The compliance we focus on is in today's conversation, obviously, is worker classification and making sure that the myriad of rules and regulations are addressed and are given visibility to, as it relates to the contractors being engaged. But the other compliance that really cannot be forgotten is payrolling and employment through these platforms. We do the screening and then we make a determination. It's either a 1099, I'm putting it bluntly and simply, but it's either a 1099 or it's a W-2. You need to call in, W-2 payrolling firm experts to make sure that compliance is being adhered to, and particularly around, the number of hours worked, overtime, and one of the challenges that, I'm sure John, who was on the call today, would acknowledge to in some of these faster paced direct sourcing online platforms is, you have to get the I-9 done, and there are other onboarding requirements that really don't lend themselves to really fast processing like we can do on the 1099 side. So we fully acknowledge that and recognize that, and we bring in payrolling experts to help us address that compliance issue, because it really is a different set of rules that you need to follow. But thanks for the question.
Great, thanks, Michael. And we have one final one before we wrap up here. Do clients see Shortlist as a tech vendor or a consultancy or a recruitment business? How do you guys categorize your business? That's a great question. I can just take that and then wrap up here. I guess what we would consider ourselves to be is a workforce management platform serving sort of the end-to-end life cycle of what we have is essentially an external worker, an independent contractor, freelancer, et cetera. Everything from onboarding through to payments and offboarding. So we really try hard to bake compliance into everything that we do, which was a huge goal of this webinar. And to transition out, I just want to thank Michael and Chris, and thank you to everyone for joining the webinar. I'm going to send out a link to today's webinar in your email for future viewing. Feel free to share with your colleagues or your professional network. I also wanted to let you know that we will be offering a complimentary review for a limited time in regards to your compliance program. So please feel free to get in touch with us regarding that. And I can also stick around for a few minutes to answer any questions, but thank you guys for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.